Today's our last session together exploring several women in the Bible who I think really exemplify strength, resilience, and complexity. And I want to look at where we are right now, what we studied, what we kind of landed on, and then dive into Miriam, and then we'll wrap up by looking at the women as a whole also. So I'll share my screen with you. And as you know already, one of the first things that I will do is just invite you to email me if you have any questions that you don't get to ask during the class. And I also invited you here if this is a topic that you're interested in exploring even more. There are so many women in the Bible to draw strength from. You can, or you're interested in other areas of Torah study, you can certainly email me. And this is the contact form to my website that you're welcome to fill out too. So let's go to this screen here. And just kind of, there's a lot here, but I want to take a step back with you and I'll see if I can scroll down a bit. So I included Ruth, even though her character wasn't part of our 3-part series, because some of you, I think, were with me for the Ruth series, but I want to bring her in as a woman from whom we can also draw tremendous strength and from who we can emulate also. So Ruth exemplified for us chesed, and I'll remind people who might want to go back or who didn't, who weren't with us in our session on Ruth. She is in her book, Megillat Ruth, the Scroll of Ruth, is in the writings section of the Bible, the 3rd of the 3 sections of the Bible. You can Google it, you can send me an email and I'll send you a link for what I think is a good translation. She really exemplifies through somewhat of a complex story, acts of love and kindness. And I suggested that she also exemplifies treating herself with kindness as well. And because of her focus on acts that perpetuate lineage, Judean lineage, and that's, I'm making a cause and effect statement here that certainly we could say more about, but we won't right now. She is one of King David's ancestors. She is his great grandmother. I believe it's great, not great, but I always have to go back and check my chart. And the first session that we did together for this series was we focused on Devorah, and there's no doubt about it, Devorah has incredibly strong public leadership skills, and you may recall that we learned together a commentary that breaks down different aspects of her leadership and her intelligence into really what I called emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and her cognitive intelligence. And she was a great communicator, this commentator said. The verses say that people came to her, the Israelites came to her for judgment so that she could facilitate any challenges they were having amongst each other. And she was someone who could rebuke. She could tell them when they were doing the wrong thing, and she could tell them when they were doing the wrong thing, and she got through to them. And she is called a prophetess. We studied Tamar together last week. To me, one of the ways that I like to talk about her the most is she intuits, it's a challenging verb, she intuits the right thing. She knew that Levirate marriage was something that should have come her way in order for her to have a child. And she did what she could to make that happen. She herself, you may recall that she starts off, we don't know very much about her. There's no dialogue. She's a quiet character. And then she transforms herself into a woman of great strength. And she perpetuates the lineage of the Judean people and becomes one of the ancestors of King David. So just taking a step back, we have all these, we have a sense of a strong ethic going backwards, a sense of a strong ethic, a fiery, passionate, multiple intelligence woman, and a woman who exemplifies chesed. So what I want to do today is dive into Miriam's character and see how she fits into this. What does she add as a woman in the Hebrew Bible that we can learn from? And there's no shortage of things that we can learn from her. I'll say also the material on Miriam, the rabbinic midrashim, the rabbinic narrative interpretive commentaries about her stories are copious, and it's there's so much more. I wish we had a month or a year to study Miriam. So let's jump in. So you were sent in advance a text document, a document with sections from the Hebrew Bible, and we will dive into the first one together. I have added, per usual, as I said to Julie when we first got on the call, I have added quite a bit of material, and I'll walk you through as much as we can. So I'd like to ask for a volunteer reader for text number 1, verses 1 through 10.
And if someone wants to read, you can let me know in the chat box and I can unmute you. Okay, great. So Robin, let me unmute you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Robin.
Okay, there we are.
Thank you.
A certain man of the house of Levi went and married a Levite woman. The woman conceived and bore a son. And when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, explaining, "I drew him out of the water."
Okay, thank you, Robin. In Hebrew, Moses' name is Moshe, or Moshe, and that word can be understood to mean being drawn out of the water. So let's notice what Moshe's unnamed sister does in this story. So Moses is born, and because of Pharaoh's decree that Hebrew baby boys must be killed, Moses' mom wants to save him. She puts him in a basket in the Nile River. And then Miriam, who's not named here, and for all we know, maybe Moses had a different sister, but we're going to assume that Miriam right now is the one that's being referenced here. So Miriam stations herself at a distance to look out for her baby brother, and then she facilitates Moses' mother actually being the nurse for him. So how would you describe this young woman in this text here? So I'll invite 1 or 2 comments. Just what would you glean from this text about Moshe's sister, Moses' sister?
And if someone wants to comment, let me know in the chat or use the raise hand function and I can unmute you. A couple of comments are in the chat. Really brave to suggest her mother as a nurse. And another comment from Carol, she has a plan. Lori says crafty. And Gloria, you are unmuted. So you still need to unmute yourself on your end.
Right. Well, maybe she somehow knew that this child's going to be very, very special,
Okay,
and
great.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it was like what they say, beshert.
It was meant to be. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think with the women in, I like what you're saying, Gloria. I think with the women that we've studied so far, all of them seem to have this very strong intuition. And also they pay it close attention to, they want the next generation to continue. They want to perpetuate Hebrew, Israelite, Judean lineage. And someone else wrote, as Julie said, that she was particularly brave. Absolutely. What stands out to me here the most is that this young woman is very nurturing and caring. That seems to me what's driving her here. So more than anything else, definitely brave, definitely perhaps she intuits something meant to be, she intuits a bigger picture. But in this story, she does seem to be deeply loving and caring of her younger brother and her family. So let's continue on to the next time that Miriam is mentioned in the Torah and talk about her character in that story. You may recall text number 2 from after the trauma of the Hebrews being enslaved, of in the process of their becoming free, crossing the Sea of Reeds. Yam Suf mistakenly became called the Red Sea. It's actually the Sea of Reeds. And we see in verses 20 and 21, and actually you don't have this document, but I am going to show you, that in Exodus 15, we have a very long, you don't have to pay close attention to every single word here, but in Exodus 15, not so long, we have a song, a poem that Moses sings on behalf of the people of Israel. Moses begins by saying, Moses and the Israelites say, I will sing to the Lord. He has triumphed gloriously, and you may recognize these words from liturgy. Ashira ladonai ki ga'o ga'a, sus v'rochvo rama vayam. These words are actually said every morning as part of the Shacharit service. And you can see at the end of the verse, at the end of the chapter in verses 20 and 21, this is the same text that is in the document you have, but I'm looking here so we can look at the blue text together. Miriam actually says the same exact thing that Moses says. Moses and the people of Israel sing a poem, and Miriam closes off. She concludes the song. She and the women go out with timbrels, and then they together, using the same words, conclude the song. So I wonder, what do you make of Miriam's role here, of Miriam's role as a poet, as a singer to God, Miriam and the gathering of other women with their timbrels, with their instruments. And if you don't know Debbie Friedman, a well-known Debbie Friedman song about Miriam dancing with her timbrels, I suggest searching for it on YouTube. It's really fun. And so I wonder what you make of Miriam here in this story, but also paying close attention to the fact that her words are Moses's words from the beginning of the chapter. So I'll invite a few comments, a few ideas, your ideas about Miriam's character. So I think I actually saw my student, Michael. Michael, can you give me a thumbs up if you just raised your hand? Okay, so Julie, can we unmute Michael?
Yeah, Michael, you're unmuted.
And I just want to say, Michael is one of my students here in New York City. And he actually said to me, I mentioned this, I think in our first or second session, when I told him about women in the Bible. He said, well, some of you may recall, I was planning to explore Sarah, who's a very strong character in her own ways. And Michael said, well, why aren't we doing Miriam? Isn't she a strong character? So it is thanks to Michael that we are exploring Miriam together today.
I was reading someplace else, we were allowed to do that. And Miriam is one of the leaders of Israel. with Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam. And this is where she does something. It's rather remarkable. She goes down to the water and makes the Israelites feel comfortable and with the timbrels and the singing and all that.
Okay, so Michael, I hear you saying, if I'm not mistaken, really Miriam is named here as one of the leaders. Maybe it's not. There's nothing so unusual about the fact that she is a leader here at the crossing of the Red Sea, right alongside Moses. Is that correct? That this is a story that's an example of her leadership in general? I don't know if Michael's muted. Yes. Okay, great. Okay, great.
I read it probably in a commentary and someplace else. The three of them, the two brothers and Miriam, the triad or whatever they are really the leaders. And she's giving equal, according to this text, she was given equal weight as Moses and Aaron.
Great. Okay, thank you. I would suggest, it didn't sound like to Michael, it made a difference that Miriam's words in verse 21 are the same as Moses's words in verse 1. She is a leader in her own right here. I think I hold both of those things together. On the one hand, there's a duality here. Miriam is repeating something that Moses said. On the other hand, she's the one who gets to close this poem of great gratitude, the song of great gratitude to God. And I would like to share with you also, this is a new text, so it's on our screen. I'm gonna skip 2A and I'm gonna go straight to a commentary here. This is a late rabbinic commentary that I'll read, and I wanna share with you how some of the rabbis understood Miriam's role. So this particular rabbi, Rabbi Zalman Sorotskin, says, Miriam did not sing a new song. He's picking up on what's happening in the text. She and the women only repeated the song of Moses and the children of Israel. But, and I added the but in, with great vivacity, and it's a strange word, and emotion, with drums and dancing. It was the same song, but with an intense concentration and sacred fervor, surpassing that of the men. And some of you may have heard this before. Indeed, the women of that generation were more righteous than the men, and it was by their merit that our ancestors were redeemed. The women of the generation of slaves in Egypt and the generation that were saved by God, taken out of Egypt, are acclaimed in rabbinic thought as having more bravery and courage and a closer connection to God, intuiting God's role and the inevitable outcome of being freed from Egypt. So this is one example of that. And again, speaking to the duality of, on the one hand, the text about Miriam with dancing with timbrels, her words are similar to those of Moses. And on the other hand, she's the one that concludes the song. And this is a perfect example of a rabbinic text that really picks up on a special role that's given to her. Some of you may also be wondering, why is she mentioned as Aaron's sister? Why does the text not say Miriam, Moses' sister? And there are multiple commentaries on that too. One commentary says that if Aaron, and this connects a little bit to what Michael was saying, if Aaron hadn't been mentioned, the three leaders of the Israelites would not be included in this important event of the Song of the Sea. And so another explanation, a little bit different, is that because, and we'll see in just a few moments, Aaron prompted Miriam being healed after she was stricken with sara'at, often mistranslated as leprosy, after she spoke poorly of Moses. And we'll see that text in just a few moments, but he's given, some rabbinic commentaries say that he was described as Miriam's brother rather than Moses being described, because he deserved a special honor because he was the one that went to bat for Miriam in the story that we're about to read in the book of Numbers. So I'll pause there. I did see that there was one hand. I'll pause there for one or two questions or comments, and then we'll shift to a story that really changes, I think, Miriam's character a little bit in the Torah.
Joy, you can unmute yourself. Joy? Okay, I don't know what happened to Joy. Any other comments or questions? There were a few in the chat box. Oh, Joy says butt dial. Robin says she sets the tone that something joyous has happened. They might have been exhausted and traumatized, but she gathered everyone up and helped them respond to what happened with gratitude and joy.
Great. And I see Deb's comment also that they have very connected souls. She must have led the women to make the instruments before they left Egypt. A fine leader, as good as any man. So Deb, it's so interesting that you mentioned the timbrels, because rabbinic commentaries also say that the women had the timbrels, and this was an example of how they did, in fact, as you said, create them before they left Egypt, because they knew they were about to be saved. So, and they had full faith in God that would happen. So again, women are portrayed in the generation of slavery and freedom as more intuitive and connected to God. Okay, so we're going to shift gears onto a more difficult text and read a rabbinic commentary after we read the text also. So far we have Miriam as caring and nurturing as a young woman, and then certainly as one of the spiritual leaders of the Israelites, perhaps within certain bounds because she was a woman, but we'll just for now say that she was in addition to being caring and nurturing, as expressed in Exodus chapter 2, in Exodus chapter 15, her character does express some great spiritual leadership. I'm going to share my screen again. And I'd like to invite someone, one person here on our call, to go ahead and read Numbers 12. I may stop you along the way because it's a little bit long, but if we read the full chapter, it's 60 of the full section that I've highlighted, it's 16 verses. So may I ask for a volunteer?
Great, Elizabeth?
Okay, you can hear me?
Thank you, Elizabeth, yes.
Okay. Okay. I only see up to, you're on number 1, right? Did you say
yes.
Number 12? Okay.
Do you see?
Okay,
yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses regarding the Cushite woman he had married, for he had married a Cushite woman. They said, "Has the Lord spoken only to Moses? Hasn't he spoken to us too?" And the Lord heard. Now this man Moses was exceedingly humble, more so than any person on the face of the earth. The Lord suddenly said to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, "Go out, all 3 of you, to the tent of meeting." And all 3 went out. The Lord descended in a pillar of cloud and stood at the entrance of the tent. He called to Aaron and Miriam, and they both went out. He said, "Please listen to my words. If there be prophets among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known to him in a vision. I will speak to him in a dream. Not so is my servant Moses. He is faithful throughout my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth in a vision and not in riddles, and he beholds the image of the Lord. So why were you not afraid to speak against my servant Moses?" The wrath of the Lord flared against them, and he left. The cloud departed from above the tent, and behold, Miriam was afflicted with zerah, as white as snow. Then Aaron turned to Miriam, and behold, she was afflicted with the wrath. Aaron said to Moses, "Please, Master, do not put sin upon us for acting foolishly and for sinning. Let her not be like the dead, which comes out of his mother's womb, with half his flesh consumed." Moses cried out to the Lord, saying, "I beseech you, God, please heal her." The Lord replied to Moses, "If her father were to spit in her face, would she not be humiliated for 7 days? She shall be confined for 7 days outside the camp, and afterwards she may enter." So Miriam was confined outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not travel until Miriam had entered. Then the people departed from Hazeroth, and they camped in the desert of Paran.
Okay, thank you so much, Elizabeth. So I want to summarize what we read and then analyze what we read with you. First of all, there are 2 complaints here against Moses. The commentaries like to tie them together, but really they do seem like separate complaints. The land of Cush in the Hebrew Bible could be one of 2 things. It could be Midian, which is to the east of Israel, or it could be Ethiopia. The rabbinic commentaries say that perhaps Moses married an additional woman after Zipporah, the woman that he married early on in Exodus. Zipporah was a Midianite. That's why some commentators try and connect Cush and Midian. Other commentators say, no, this is a second woman, and he married another woman, and the complaint is about that woman. So regardless, commentators do consider this an ethnic issue. They don't like that, and there are other places in the Bible also where we pick up, where we can see that it's possible that Miriam and Aaron did not like that Moses did not marry an Israelite woman. That's one complaint. The other complaint, which I would like to talk a little bit more with you about, is in verse 2. Why is Moses better than us? Why does God have a special relationship with Moses? Why are we're prophets. God sometimes speaks to us also. Miriam is called a prophet. Why don't we have the same status as Moses? And I want to come back to that verse in just a moment. But the narrator of the text is really telling us they should not have. It is very clear. And in fact, you may have noticed, or you may have learned before, that even though the English here says Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses, the Hebrew says Vatidaber, she spoke. And the commentators say that she's the one that initiated the complaint, which I think is important for our analysis of Miriam's character. So we're told this complaint should not have been expressed. Moses was humble. God reprimands Miriam and Aaron and says, I have a special relationship with Moses. And this is one of the places in the Torah where we learn that God has a special relationship with Moses, but that is often described in different ways. You may know another text where Moses asks to see God's face and God's like, oh, sorry, you could only see my back. So we have different traditions about how Moses and God interacted. God was very angry. Miriam got sara'at, which is discussed, I was going to say ad nauseum, but I'll just say at great length in the middle of the book of Leviticus. And then Aaron appeals on Miriam's behalf and says, please don't let her skin be like the skin of a young child, a newborn that's just crinkled and isn't full of life. And then we have one of the most famous lines about healing and prayer, El na rafat na la, please God heal her. And she's outside the camp. Her punishment is that she has to be outside the camp for 7 days. But notice that there are these verses here about the people's response to Miriam. So I want to invite here your comments, which based on a few different questions. First of all, the text in and of itself, this story in Numbers 12, what does it express about Miriam as a character? But let's also think about the arc of Miriam's character. And it's true in the Torah, we've talked before, I've shared with you how I like to name and engage in both pshat and drash. I like to look at each text in its biblical and Near Eastern context, but what we're doing here is a bit of a drash. We're looking at the arc of Miriam's character, which could be from different sources over different times, but from the very beginning in Exodus all the way to here in Numbers, from the time she was a young woman to the time that she was in the desert with Moses and the Israelites. So what do you make of Miriam in this text itself? And and these are related questions, what do you make of what seems like a transformation that she has undergone from perhaps a woman of great spiritual leadership to the woman described in this chapter here, Numbers 12? So I'll invite one or two comments and then we'll begin to wrap up.
Okay, a couple folks have raised their hands. So Martha?
Okay, what I'm thinking is, did I miss the part where he said, gee, Miriam, you saved my life. That was kind of nice of you.
Okay, so Martha, are you suggesting perhaps Miriam might have been angry at something interpersonal going on between she and Moses? That maybe
more that here I am, I took care of you, I watched you, I whatever, now you put me back, I'm not even the Ezrat Nashim, I'm in a very, very high mechitza.
Okay, so Martha is saying that Miriam's complaint here seems to speak to the fact that, and she's making a metaphor, connecting us to a metaphor of a synagogue where she's not even on her own side of the partition. And Martha, what did you say again? She's not in the
She's not even in the Ezrat Nashim where she could be seen. She's well beyond a very high dividing wall.
Okay, so thank you. So I will call our attention to the fact that the complaint here did seem to be against God, perhaps, rather than Moses. It sounds like, though this is certainly debatable, it sounds like Miriam is saying, well, why don't we have what Moses had? And we know Moses was given everything he had, his ability to communicate with God from God, God's self. So that may change your take a little bit, Martha, but I really like and appreciate that I'm finding that you're sensitizing us to the fact, well, what was the dynamic between Miriam and Moshe? And she was someone who did save his life early on, and now she's perhaps of second rank. And I shouldn't actually say perhaps, she's certainly of a second rank in many ways. So any other comments about what might be going on in this chapter and then the arc of her, anything about the arc of her character?
Andrea?
Oh, hi. Great class as always.
Thanks, Andrea.
So it seems to me, thank you for this class. It seems to me that what's going on with Miriam here is the text is reflecting the lessening importance of Miriam in the text, because clearly she's very important. She's referred to as Miriam the prophetess. The Israelites can't move without her because she controls the water, Miriam's well. So in order for the Israelites to live, yes, they need Moses's spiritual and political leadership, but they would die in 2 days without water. Miriam is, I see her as, and other like feminist Jews or scholars, whatever, see Miriam is really the life force of the Israelite people in the desert. They cannot survive without Miriam and Miriam's well. And as the text moves on, as the story progresses, as the narrative progresses, we have this like backlash against Miriam. I think it's because of her power and that she knows how powerful she is, and so do the people. And then at the end of this narrative, you know, Miriam, it's like her death is just passed over. It's like, oh, and Miriam died, you know, whereas Moses gets, you know, there's a lot of hoopla surrounding the male leader's death. And when Miriam dies, it's just like, it's like a footnote at best. So I think the text I think this narrative is reflecting the patriarchal text. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let me respond to a few things that Andrea said and then try and tie this together and offer my suggestion for the arc of Miriam's character. I'm going to share my screen again because I'm going to reference the text. I'm going to be looking at it and I want you to see what I see, even though you might do that. So first of all, in terms of Miriam and the well, so what I want to share, Andrea, is that is a midrash. That is not in the text itself. She may indeed be some kind of life force, but I want us to name it. It's important to me that we name it. That is something that the rabbis certainly picked up on. She does seem to have some kind of special role. Her name, interestingly, can mean one of two things. It can mean bitter sea, mar is bitter, but it can also mean defiance or rebellious. And she is certainly a character that defies, that lifts herself up outside of certain patriarchal confines. She lifts herself up out of what is expected. Generally speaking, it is the men who are the spiritual leaders, but definitely not all the time, as we've seen in especially with Devorah also. And there are other female prophets that we could also, if we had more time, bring into our conversation. I do think that one way of looking at this, as Andrea said, is it's possible that the text itself, the writers are having a difficult time with her spiritual leadership and her status and do bring her down a notch here. I want to offer a bit of a psychological reading, which is that maybe she was frustrated. Maybe she was frustrated with, to use the word that Andrea used, with the patriarchy, but I'm going to make it more specific. Maybe she was frustrated that her spiritual leadership could only go so far. Maybe she was frustrated that after the crossing of the Red Sea, when she spontaneously, and some of the rabbis note this also, spontaneously, spiritually, took women and exclaimed with more vivaciousness, as the one commentary we read saw, God's power and ability to allow the Israelites to become free. And then in the desert, she did not have as much of a role. In the travels, she did not have as much of a role. And Martha picked up on this too. Maybe she was frustrated and she didn't know how to express it in a productive way. And what could she do in ancient Israel in the time that the story is set? There were great limits on what she could do. I want to say nevertheless, I think that we can certainly, even though to some extent her character, her words backfire, she is punished. And as we saw in the text, she and Aaron both engage in a conversation, but the writer says she instigated it. Vatidaber, she spoke. So she is, to some degree, either or both, more frustrated and also the one who is given the responsibility for not understanding how important, sorry about the noise, how important Moses was. So I do want to suggest that we get to do it differently today. What we get to learn from Miriam is not only her spiritual leadership, but we get to learn we don't have, unless they're internal, which we can all work on those, we don't have the same kind of, we may have some, but we don't have the same kind of external boundaries and limits that Miriam had. So especially in this difficult time, I invite all of us to think about what spiritual leadership each of us can tap into and how we can bring people together in gratitude the same way that Miriam was able to do. And when we do get frustrated, we are able to channel those frustrations we're all human. And I saw in the comments, someone said, even Moses made mistakes. Yes, we're all human. The Bible is full of characters and heroes of flaws, full. So we get to make mistakes too, but that to our best abilities, we channel Miriam's spirituality, and we also learn from the ways in which she could not achieve perhaps what she wanted, but we, I hope, in a different time can achieve some of those things for ourselves, no matter what gender we are. And I want to take this a step further and invite us to think about all of the inspiring women, from Ruth's chesed to Tamar's strength. We have so many different complex women in the Tanakh, that in the Hebrew Bible, that we can draw so much strength from. And so sometimes when we do think, oh, it's such a patriarchal culture, it's such a patriarchal text, I want to invite us to really draw inspiration from all the women who may have lived at a different time. Their characters may have been set at a different time than we live, but certainly even a couple thousand years later, there's much inspiration to be drawn. So thank you for joining me for this series on strong, resilient, complex biblical women. We certainly ended with a complex character, the complex character of Miriam, and I invite you to email me, Abby@ExploreJewish, with any comments or additional reflections that we didn't get to share. And I believe, we have one more minute, so if someone wants to share one brief comment, we can go ahead and take one brief comment at the end of this class together.
Susan wanted to share something.
Well, I happened to read the handout before we had this discussion.
Wonderful.
And, well, the chapter beforehand, it turned out that Miriam was sitting, I guess, with Zipporah and some other women, and discovered that Moses had left her. And so Miriam goes to Aaron and says, this is what's been going on. There's, Moses has left Zipporah. And Miriam gets punished for for bringing this news to Aaron. But the fact that Aaron is the chief priest, and he's the brother of Moses, if Miriam hadn't told him, she would have been, she wasn't cooperating with the family unit.
Okay.
And so the fact that she gets.
Yeah, Susan, let me interject there just in the interest of time. And I appreciate your bringing this commentary in. Susan is actually referencing a commentary. It does not say in the Hebrew Bible itself that Miriam learned from Zipporah, from Moses' wife, that they had separated. One thing we did not get to discuss, which is right here in front of us in my screen share and in your document also, I believe, is that the rabbis, one of the things that the rabbis see is Miriam, again, building off of her nurturing, caring, concern for Hebrew Israelite lineage. She is concerned that Moses has separated from his wife. And it's not in the text, but if you look at the ways in which Moses did separate, Zipporah does disappear from the narrative, his wife from early on in Exodus does disappear from the narrative for a brief time. And so the rabbis say that Moses had become celibate, certainly while he was up on Sinai, and then even afterwards. And they're critical of that because that is generally speaking, not part of Jewish tradition. So I would say the rabbis even add an additional positive layer, some of the rabbis add an additional positive layer onto Miriam as expanding on the caring, nurturing young woman concerned with the continuity of the Israelite people. They add that on through this commentary. So Susan, I appreciate your sharing that because it adds another layer onto all the positives that we can glean from Miriam. So I do know we are at 2 minutes over. So I want to just thank everyone again for participating and for sharing your own ideas also. That is my style of teaching and learning, and I love learning from your insights also. So thank you.